Okay, I'm going to try to record this because I've had a couple of requests. I'm not going to go over this first screen because I'm sure you can read down. If you have any questions, just email me. But I want to start off with the history of the terminology. Autism itself was first described around 1911 as an offshoot of schizophrenia. It traveled through to 1940s where it was officially used as an official diagnosis, but is still lumped in with schizophrenia. In the 1970s, it was spun off into a developmental disability and a couple other words that we're no longer allowed to use. And this is where I come in. At that time, schools were only diagnosing those where it interfered with academics and those who were socially disruptive. And it was still commonly used as a childhood diagnosis. So here's the history in the DSM, which is used by America and Canada. And in the DSM, they did not even recognize it until about 1968 when it came out, but it was still a form of schizophrenia. And I come in about that time. In the 80s, they spun it off from schizophrenia. 94, they started classifying it. They said, okay, this looks like its own unique phenomenon with a couple of different branches. So they branched it off. But by 2013, with all of the brain scans they had done, they finally realized, oh, wait, this is one big fluid phenomenon where things just blur from one end to the other. The ICD, which is an international classification of disorders, they were labeling people like me as psychotic up until like the 1990s. And then they broke it off into a pervasive developmental disorder, which just means that we uh, developed slowly. And in 2018, we saw the ICD change the term to be part of a broad spectrum and emphasizing the diversity and the fluidness of autism itself. Growing up, again, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I always knew I was different. I wasn't diagnosed. Most people just were chalking it up to the fact that I had hydrocephalus, which also is attributed to schizophrenia. So they just thought, okay, this guy is psychotic or schizophrenic or whatever term you wanted to use. I've constantly felt detached. People who loved me and wanted to do best would always tell me, no, you're not different. You're just trying to be different. The people who were not trying to help me grow would gladly tell me I was different and gladly tell me that I did not fit in. Growing up, again, I was not diagnosed till I was 40. I didn't realize I was autistic till my 40s. I always had this still need to fit in, but it didn't matter if it was in band or school or clubs or parties or hanging out with friends. By 30 minutes in, I realized I was completely overwhelmed. I talk about being in a metal band where we wore spandex, long hair, and earrings and all that during the 80s, of not being able to practice more than 30 minutes. And these were songs I loved and I wrote and was a part of developing. And yet I still became overwhelmed in the process. So I spent, again, the first 40 years thinking I was just broken. I was busted up goods. And in my 40s, family members started showing up with my unique characteristics. And the thing about those characteristics is they were not transferable from my hydrocephalus. In other words, they were post-gestational. And all of a sudden we realized, oh, wait, this is a design difference. And I tell people, I remember the day that I stood there and realized I wasn't broken. I mean, that's how clear and concise the understanding was to me that I was not broken. I was just different. And I got my diagnosis in my 50s because of COVID messing up my routine, and I needed accommodations. And the work environment I was in saying, okay, we can accommodate you. We just need a written documentation. Understanding the current terminology, before 2013, we were just breaking things into infantile autism or low functioning and Asperger's, which is high functioning. So it's, in other words, these are the people that will never function in society, and these are the people that are going to grow up to be our leaders. In 2013, they started trying to break it out according to a person's individual struggles. Will they be able to function on their own, or do we expect them to need support? The next round of classifications, who knows where it will go? This is one guy I'd like to point out when talking about these levels or diagnoses. Jason Arday, or actually Dr. Jason Arday, was developmentally delayed and couldn't speak till he was 11. Didn't learn to read till he was 18, and just became the youngest Black professor at Cambridge. So, in other words, between 18 and his mid 20s, he learned more than what the average person learns in decades. And so, and I like to point out the Maori, I can never pronounce the correct word, which is Takiwatonga, which emphasized that each person grows at their own rate. So now we're into our modern internet with all the internet doctors out there and internet therapists out there trying to develop their own metrics and parameters to try to visualize the spectrum. And so, again, if you go onto the web, you'll see a myriad of different layouts where people are connecting, okay, bipolar disorder and anxiety and ADHD and all those things and how they relate to the autism spectrum. So, all this being said, one of the things we have to realize when discussing autism is that people are entering this discussion under different definitions and terminology. So you'll have people from, say, a camp A who view autistic people as people simply uncontrolled, disciplined, schizophrenic, bad parents, and all these other negative connotations. You'll have camp B, which sees the beauty in the autistic experience and just sees the beautiful spectrum and all that. And then you have people like me up till about age 40, where I had no clue what it was. So I was simply creating a sort of somewhere between Down syndrome and Rain Man configuration of what this phenomenon was. One thing I also like to point out is we need to be careful of well, at least they aren't low functioning, they aren't this level, they aren't that level. We have to remember we're talking about individuals, not beef jerky. We're not talking about a flavor of cookie. We're talking about individuals that have their own unique development path, and we need to allow them to develop, like Dr. Jason, where he didn't speak till he was 11, but he's now a professor. So we can't simply just limit them according to some label. It's a hidden disability that has only been recognized for about 120 years. Prior to that, we were holy fools and village idiots and all these other people that you would tend to annoy, or annoy you, or would end up becoming the leaders or something like that. Just something off the common um, path. It was only until recently, like in the 1990s, where tools like MRIs and CAT scans were used to see how the brain was actually functioning differently. The brains aren't significantly different in the design. Most autistic brains, if you sat them next to a non-autistic brain, they're going to look the same, but the difference appears to be in the wiring. One thing that this person who does speeches, Pete Warmby, you can go look him up, but he has this nice graph where he talks about why are so many people being sudden? Why is the it increasing as far as the diagnosis? And it's not because the rate of people being autistic is growing, except for the fact that now we're becoming popular and having kids. The actual issue is the whole phenotypical. We are understanding what this phenomenon is, and we are developing better metrics to say, okay, here's what it is, and here's who fits on that, in that spectrum, and here's what doesn't technically fit on that spectrum. It's not, as I said, it's not increasing, besides a growing awareness, and social stigmas are being addressed. When I first realized I was autistic, I heard a lot of people say, don't tell anybody. And well, I'm telling everybody now. I don't hide it at all. Things like labels and diagnosis are only aids to help us grasp and comprehend things. You are one of the things I hear, and sometimes when I do speeches, I'll have people say, well, way back yonder, I was diagnosed as ADHD, but now I think I'm autistic, and or I was officially anxiety and they were treating this and now they're putting me over here. We have to realize these are only diagnostic tools to help us understand how we function. And as the understanding of autism grows, those labels and diagnoses are going to change. So you can't be like tied to them, bound to them, superglue yourself to them. But you can use them as tools to do your own research. Obstacles to diagnosis that we see is that a lot of people like me, until I was 40 and faced with it, I did not know what it is. We also have to realize, like as I pointed out with the history of the negative stigmas, there are still people from the old narratives that view it as a negative connotation. Then again, like with my hydrocephalus, a lot of people find their autism being masked by other phenomenon. And again, being in the world that I was raised in, it was better to be labeled as brain damaged than autistic. In modern society, where we're becoming dependent on public diagnosis and public therapies, we got to understand a lot of those things, like the schools, are under constraints where they don't have a lot of money and resources to help people. So they will literally, like they literally told us, Matt, our child may be autistic at home, but he's not autistic at school. So they will try to brush as much as they can away. And then, of course, we have the various socioeconomic hindrances where certain communities may not have the resources, or they may have their own stigmas that they have to address before getting a proper diagnosis. I like to emphasize to parents that diagnosis and labels don't change who I am. I've always been me. All these things that make me quirky have always existed. And the medicine and therapies don't mean that we failed. It means that we're simply trying to do things to help us overcome obstacles that may be viewed as insurmountable. It means that I have a working paradigm to help me cope. Undiagnosed autistic people can be anything like leaders and innovators in the field because they try different things. They're not bound by the box. Nerds who stay at the desk because we don't like crowds of people. People who refuse to follow the program, or in my case, don't understand the program. A lot of them have been institutionalized. I once visited an institution as a child, and they said, "Does this look like some place you might find comfort to work out some things?" So, and then there are also people that are hotheads, because when I get to meltdowns, I'll talk about that a lot of autistic people have a strong triggering mechanism of defense and flight, and it makes some of us burst out. And it's still treated as schizophrenia with some other people who don't have the ability to control their outbursts. And a lot of them, unfortunately, end up with poor or illegal or addictive coping mechanisms where they find out that these illicit drugs and things like that help them accommodate, but they come with all the negative um, attributes of those things. And then last of all, a lot of us just end up feeling like we're losers. We have to remember that autistic people are balancing two distinct worlds. One is the normal world where everybody's expecting them to act normal. And then we have the other side that's saying, you're unique. Here are all the ways you're unique, and you need to be able to express it. And so we're fighting the way to balance all of this. And sometimes that becomes overwhelming in and of itself. So I want to dabble on this. I know it's a controversial issue, but I like to address it so people know where some of these myths and things come from. One of the very first ones was called the refrigerator mother theory, by a guy named Bruno in the 50s, and it blamed autism and other things of the like because the mother or some parental unit wasn't warm and emotional and responsive, lots of bad parenting. They let the kid do whatever they want, throw tantrums. But this was eventually thrown out through research. And then one of the more common ones is vaccines, which came out of a guy named Andrew Wakefield and a paper he did that was disproven and basically thrown away for being very bad research. Now, I'd like to throw in here, because a lot of people do say, well, vaccines caused my child to act differently. You have to realize that autistic people can be hypersensitive to things that other people are not sensitive to. So, like, we respond to food dyes, we respond to external stimulus like grass smells and fingers tapping and all these things. So, there is always the possibility that for some reason they respond negatively to the vaccine. But it's not the causal starts with the person already being autistic, not the vaccines causing the autism. And then, of course, the current quackery. I just want to simply state your pain relievers did not cause your child's autism. Now, one thing that is unique, and I remember reading this a while back, like in about 2012, there There was a phenotypical study that says, a lot of autistic people, when we look at them, they are built very similar to Neanderthals. And then very recently from Clemson, where I work, somebody came out and said, there looks like there are some genetic similarities between a Neanderthal's DNA and people who are on the spectrum. Now, again, it's still very much in the hypothetical, so don't run off and declare this as a doctrine for the medical world. The guy that's doing this study pointed out that autism is a complex trait controlled by many genes. A big part in the lab is to understand the complexity. And so they're trying to see where there might be common links. So again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can stop this and read it yourself. All this to being saying, it means that I understand who I am and that I'm not simply broken. How it works. Your brain works like a motherboard on a computer. Your brain's not just a big blob of fat and nerves. It's actually organized, and different parts of the brain do different things. And it also has a system of distributing those signals. And the two things I like to talk about, one is called gating, which means that your brain is controlling the amount of signals, and then channeling, which means that your brain is telling the signals where to go. And then again, I like to put in this caveat, what I'm sharing is an intricate part of the autistic experience, but it's not limited to those who are autistic. People who have had trauma, chemical, genetics, and other health issues and brain conditionings can experience similar conditions. But nobody is a little bit autistic, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the brain, the way it works is when you see something, it goes to the occipital processor. When you think of math, it goes to the parts of the brain that do math. When you sing, there's a specific part of the lobe that processes all your singing. And when you do speaking, again, it goes to another part. That's why, like in speech therapy, sometimes if a person can't speak, they'll have them sing because they're actually two different parts of the brain. So your calendar goes to where you internally process calendar events. So in gating, what we're having happen is that the typical brain knows how to filter out too much information and streamline it to the most pertinent piece of information that it needs to use. A person who is on the spectrum a lot of the times will not be able to filter out any signals around them. So here's a comparison. A person who is gating properly will be able to see Bob in a crowd, be able to hear Bob when he says, "Hi, I'm Bob." And the brain filters out all the other motion and sounds and things like that so you can focus and pinpoint the relevant signals. A person who can't do that well, who's not gating information well, is seeing everything at once, hearing everything at once, and their brain is being bombarded with a load of signals. My wife does this thing where if we're in a crowd, she waves at me to try to catch my attention because I could be staring right at her, but I can't see her. And I have that same problem with hearing all the time. People just turn into this big mush when they're talking. The same thing goes with subjects. When you're talking about lunch, you're supposed to stay on lunch. When you're talking about coding, you stay on coding. When you talk about math equation, your brain stays on math equation. A person who can't do that can't stay on the subject, has struggles staying on the subject, and their brain continually muddles all the information. Again, when I go through learning processes, I'll tap on this a little more. And then there's channeling. The channeling, what the brain's supposed to do when I see something, it's supposed to go to my occipital lobe. What my brain's doing, I see something and the signals go everywhere. Things can cause pain just by looking at it and agitation. And again, when I talked about conditioning, some people have this when their brain gets conditioned to I see this, ouch, all of a sudden something weird hurts. But our brain is doing it not because it's conditioned, because the wires are not going where they're supposed to. An example would be like my knee. If I hear a clicking noise, my joints get weak when I hear clicking noises. I have literally had to grasp the rail and keep myself from falling because someone started snapping their fingers while I was walking down the stairs. Spinning can make me dizzy, my joints itch. Um, I have one person in our family that you say one, they see brown. So they're mixing all the signals together. There is no definitive line between all the unique spectrum variants. Each person experiences things differently. Like you'll be talking to one person that has dyslexia, and they'll explain certain things like everything gets blurry after lunch. And then another person, everything gets blurry when I am stressed. And another person, everything's blurry all the time. Everything's backwards, everything's awkward. And so each different person may have the same label, but they may experience it in a completely unique way. So here's the illustration I like when we put it all together is the neurotypical individual is pouring water into the cup and they're able to just do it straight from the pitcher. Whereas the person like me who is the neurodiverse, and can't filter all those signals, it's like me trying to pour the same cup of water while being smashed by a tidal wave. I don't know if any water got in my cup. I don't know if it's saturated with salt. I mean, all kinds of things could happen with my cup. One thing I like to talk about and deviate is, again, most of we can see it just in the signals. But there appears that sometimes with these, there is something occurring within the brain. There's actually a physical thing. And one of those is like ADHD. And you'll notice that when they have the normal picture, it looks like a smooth spot. But when you look at the ADHD, there are two. No, this is a blood flow picture, by the way. When they get to the ADHD, there's no blood flowing into those two spots. And what that sort of emphasis implies is that there are two spots in the brain, in the frontal lobe, where we're apparently dictating where signals should go. And in the person with ADHD, they're not dictating where those signals will go. Those aspects of the brain are not functioning. Now, there are things that will help those parts function better, like stimulants, exercise, and concentration. But it's one of those things that we can physically see that's interesting to study. One of the also fascinating things is that people who show these in scans show this phenomenon. It is typically labeled as ADHD in males, but is associated with OCD in females. Now, that's not always true because there is no standard, but this may be because of social stigmas. This may be because there are differences between a male and a female brain. There all these different things that may have caused this phenomenon of why it's different in the genders. Here's an image that I drew, and this is actually an illustration I built before I knew I was autistic, because I was always trying to find a way to explain how my brain was processing information. And it means that everything I have in my head, I see it once. So you could be talking about psychology, and I have music, random trivia, science, all those things being integrated into my response and into my processing unit. So none of them are, there's no distinct segregation between concepts in my head. So one of the things again, going back to the high functioning, low functioning, and Camp C, where they don't really even know what's going on. We need to move more towards my child is level 1, level 3, high, low functioning, and I am, or my child is, struggles with these complications. I have trouble with groups. I have trouble with sensory things. I'm very clear that if you make certain noises, I react very quickly to say, stop it. And I have behavioral issues I got to deal with because most people, as going back, don't know the difference of all these things. And they're coming from different camps between DSM-2 and DSM-5. And so we can't just automatically assume what their perception is. And it's better because, again, we're dealing with a spectrum. If we are clear about the things that cause us obstacles. And like I like to throw in here, we always worry about children going, well, they're going to use it as an excuse. And the fact is, yes, we're all going to use things as an excuse. If I am told I have to go to a meeting, I will whip out I am autistic, I don't like meetings card as fast as you can say it. Because it's like, I don't want to go. Here's my card. So they're going to use it. And one of the things, part of the learning process is realizing where it is acceptable, it is beneficial, and where it creates our own obstacle to whip that card out and say, here, I want to use this card. I don't want to do that. So this is programming, though. It is not conditional or chemical or Tylenol based. It is not a learned behavior. No refrigerator mothers here. You cannot un-autism someone. Again, I am in my 50s as I record this, and I'm still same obstacles, same processes as I was when I was 10. It's not a deficit. I'm just different. I like to tackle onto medications because people ask about which medication should I use for this and this and this and that. And so I want to dabble on this very carefully because, again, you should be under a doctor's care when looking at this. But for channeling, controlling your signals, those are used with stimulants, Ritalin, Focalin, and people who are self-medicating are using things like caffeine. I abused pseudoephedrine really badly in my young adult. And when we get to the illicit medicine, drugs, same thing. So what you'll hear is the phrase, it helps put everything together. It helps everything make sense. Theoretically, what it's doing is those nodes that I showed you with ADHD, it's agitating those and making them function. What it's not doing is telling where the signals to go. As far as the gating, the overload of signals, they use antipsychotics like Abilify and these other ones I can't pronounce. It reduces our anxiety. Anything that reduces our anxiety that someone's trying to address. And you'll hear them use the phrase, it cuts out all the noise. But what it's not doing is telling signals where to go or what signals to weed out. What it's doing is it's lowering our dopamine, theoretically, and the other chemicals that are flooding our brain. This is where I had a massive amount of problems because I went under some medicine that over dried out my dopamine and it created psychosis for about 7 months of just fear and trembling. And then there's some other aspects that they'll tackle that therapists may tackle, like rumination, thinking a thought over and over and over, and just turning into a whirlwind pit. And they can be treated with like beta blockers. And emotional, they're treated with serotonin. They're trying to help increase serotonin enhancers, Zoloft, Lexapro. Again, these things are like, if you hear the phrase, I can't stop thinking about, and then the cycle, and says, and the emotional, I don't like myself, I can't properly get a reasonable view of who I am. Medicine doesn't fix it. Medicine helps balance things so we can learn how to navigate. We need to always understand the side effects, and it's our responsibility as individuals to understand what is and what is not working and what is causing side effects. More is not better and cause bad reactions. Too many stimulants. A lot of my friends who may or may not be on there can tell you about their almost seizures and the caffeine headaches and the other things. Use a doctor, but don't ignore your own observations. Meltdowns and overloads. Okay, you can read over here some of the classic distinctions between the two. A meltdown is the brain's response to being overloaded. It's not a temper tantrum because it's not emotional. It's more of a blown fuse, very much electrical. And you can think that it's sort of like an electrically charged defense mode into fight or flight. Temper tantrums, being emotional and feeding into the electrical can cause a meltdown, but meltdowns are not going to cause them to go into a temper tantrum because the electrical blowout doesn't care anything about your chemicals. And they're not always provoked. I have stories of watching my children stand still or walk in a circle and then all of a sudden have a meltdown on the floor. The meltdown will manifest in any way it needs to make it feel safe. It's called a meltdown because of empirical observations over the generations, but it's not always screaming and yelling. It can be disorientation, rage. Again, I talked about people bursting out in anger. Think people who have a short fuse. Very much this. Shutdowns. And I will tell people shutdowns are more socially acceptable because I'm not doing anything that's visually obnoxious, but internally it's very destructive. I do shutdowns. That's how it's manifested in me as an older adult. Running away and hiding. We can tell stories of our children disappearing for 2 hours in school and causing frantic search and rescue missions in the school. So it's anything the brain can do to defend itself. Like a fuse, it's on and off. They can start spontaneous and they can stop almost spontaneous. We aren't manipulating chemicals like increasing the amount of chemicals in our body and then slowly decreasing them like you do with a temper tantrum. Individuals can have triggers both on and off that flip a switch. With me, it's noise. Noise will set me off spontaneously. With others, it can be a touch to calm them down. Like people will say to our children, oh, well, they stopped spontaneously because so and so held their hand. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the way it works. Defense mode, fight or flight, is never rational. Okay, again, as I emphasized over and over, it's just looking to deal with the threat. Additional threats, don't stop it or calm it down. Because again, it's sort of like, I like to use the illustration of a toilet that stopped up and a person who thinks that they'll make the toilet work better by pouring more water into it. And we all sort of know the consequence of that is it just floods over and makes a bigger mess. What we must do, okay, and this is something a lot of people don't discuss, Even in fight or flight, we must learn what is acceptable as boundaries. A child who doesn't learn and understand the boundaries will become an adult who doesn't understand the boundaries. And the phrase I like to use is I need to learn to crash my truck without destroying things, people, or opportunities. And it's very difficult. We cannot fix overloads. I have to learn what I'm doing when I overload, and I have to learn how to manage my behaviors during the overloads using healthy mechanisms. We must decide what's acceptable. Yelling in my world, okay, you can yell your head off and scream and jump up and down, but you're not going to become verbally abusive. You can jump up and down, but you will not break things. You can move around, but hitting people and walls and things, okay, that's not okay. These things have to be taught when we are calm and reinforced when we melt down. Okay, again, when they're in meltdown, they're not in a logical state for you to discuss what is rational. They need to learn it before they get there. It's also important for us to see how our actions affect others. If it makes someone cry, we need to understand that. If it makes someone uncomfortable, we need to understand that. If we break something, we don't get a new one or we have to pay for it. And the illustration I like to use is my wife does the very motherly thing when her sons would get upset and she wanted to hide her face. But I would sit there and try to encourage her to let them see her face, see her tears, see that she was crying, because they needed to realize that their actions, regardless if they're overloaded or not, have an outcome and affect other people. So here's the verse that I learned in my pretty much my 30s. I started using this as a way to, like, when I started ruminating or I started wanting to burst out, is my way of telling my brain, okay, this is what you need to see, what you need to think about, what you need to hold to, regardless of how you're feeling. So that's, again, prior to me knowing that I was autistic, I was still already in the process of trying to reprogram my brain. What's our goal? And it doesn't matter if it's medicine, education, therapy, discipline. First of all, we need to realize that the person next to us, their goals are going to be different than ours because their narrative is different than ours. We have people like me who are desiring self affirmation. I want to be who I want to be, do what I want to do, and use my tools effectively. And then we have other people, their families are completely exasperated and it's tearing them down constantly. So the first thing we have to realize is I don't just get to decide a person's narrative, and I can't become intolerant. I may not like a certain therapy, but they may find it a lifeline. I may not like a certain organization because of some of their past historical things that they held to, but another person may find that organization as an invaluable resource. What is not our goal? Our goal is not to make everyone like us. Okay. And we're not going to be like everyone else. I said not make everyone like us. Well, that's true too. I don't care if people like me. Um, I can't fit in a box. I don't even know where the box is half the time. And I'm not trying to throw away my obstacles. My obstacles in my world become my tools to use to accomplish things. We're not trying to hide our traits. We're trying to, the best world scenario is we maximize the things that make us unique. We learn to navigate those environments and we learn how to address our deficiencies and possible turn them into strengths. But most of all, learn how to address our deficiencies in a healthy manner. We also need to recognize that there is a difference between someone who won't or someone who struggles with something and someone who can't. Like the Johnny here, it's going to be very, 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 very difficult for him to get up those steps. The other people, the one guy in the chair just needs to get up and go. The other two may need to sit for a while and recuperate, but still, they're more than likely going to be able to get up those steps. What happens when we grasp this is that we learn where accommodation and overcoming can turn into innovation. And one of the nice things about innovation is that not only do the people who find something an insurmountable obstacle, um, we help them find their way. Like Johnny can now go up the same slope. Of course, you wouldn't make the slope that steep because that would be another challenge. But we see Johnny here getting the Bob over here getting ready to take up a load of boxes. And so it's just as beneficial for him as it is for Johnny. Okay. The innovation benefits multiple people. The tale of two pedagogies. Pedagogies are theories about teaching and learning and education. So as far as learning, I broke it up into two mindsets. One of them is called the monopoly mindset, which means everything has to go according to a rule. Okay, everybody has to play by the same rules. If you don't have everybody using the same rules, then you end up with chaos or politics or some other scenario where people are playing by their own to their own benefit, and it causes literally a degradation of the game. And then the other version is what I call the Mario world, where the Mario learning environment, where the only limitations are those that which the environment imposes. So in the Monopoly world, we go through stages: math 1, math 2, math 3, okay, English 1, English 2, English 3. Things that go to top that are about sociology are tied together with the topics and all those things. In the Mario world, and this is one that my older son likes as an illustration, we just take everything that we learn and we stick it in a bucket. There's no segregation between topics. And so what happens is it allows us to derive innovative concepts. Now, they're not always correct. And I can give long stories about when I entered my dissertation program and I would start getting argumentative because I was taking a stimulant at the time, and it made me be able to put everything together really fast, but it wasn't always correct, but I thought it was. So it made me very upset. What this will also cause is this effect where we don't look like we are learning at the same rate as everybody else. So I look like it's taking me a long time to connect things, but I will get to a certain point where things will start connecting at an exponential rate, because I not only have the information about math, I'm throwing in there things about music theory or religion or ancient Ugaric sentence structures or something just really off the wall. But somehow they help build a construct that will push me above what a normal person would see. And like, again, going back to Dr. Jason Arday, um, once it hit, once he made those connections, he he was able to put things together exponentially. I'm not going to say he learned exponentially because he was probably learning all the time. It's just he hit a point where all those things were relevant. We are not developmentally delayed. We are developmentally different. We're putting it together different than our counterparts. Social and impact and communication. One of the things that we have to deal with in communication is how the ear, when it gets a piece of information, how it passes that information from grasping it to interpreting it to determine a response, determine how to communicate it, and what words to use. And all the while it's reading body language. And so it's using all these elements of the brain to communicate back a response. Someone like me who's confounding all the information, it's all going into a mesh, and I can't read body language at all. So by the time I get to the end of where I'm supposed to respond, I'm going, I hope I communicated back correctly and what I said made sense to the person who was talking to me. It will also, and I'll talk about this later, this is what causes a lot of delay in response from people on the spectrum. You got to realize that they're going through this every time you ask a question, and it can cause delayed responses, and they can get very upset if you're not tolerant with them. Other things that'll happen, I can't read faces because, again, all that information is going in and it's not going straight to the part where it says, hey, this is how you interpret his facial expression. It's going into a mush of information. I'm absorbing all the social cues and innuendos and indirect encouragement things. And so it's very hard, very confounding for me to interpret all these things. And people frequently read me wrong, usually as mad or discontent, even though I was fine, because I don't know how to convey the proper facial expression. And usually I like to tell people they read me wrong, which is fine because I'm reading them wrong too. I do not handle stress. All that information is going in and it's just getting muddled, and my brain gets overloaded very quickly. And communication gets hard. As I mentioned, it takes time for me to process things. It's up to 30 seconds. This goes with the dementia talk I listened to that my wife heard, that it takes like 30 seconds sometimes for those individuals to process the information. And if they detect, or if I detect that you're being impatient and not willing to wait for me to process the information, I stop processing information. So things that go along, I don't know how to make friends very well. Most of my friends were friends of friends. Only way I knew how to make friends by myself was to do something to be noticed. I wanted to be a rock star, or I'd do things very obnoxious, create identities and things like that, just so I could be something significant that would create a way for me to make friends. I rarely hung around homogenous groups of peers. People were usually older, younger, female, but I was typically overwhelmed. This also affects my ability to process time. A lot of people I know on the spectrum have trouble with time. They see things literally as today, yesterday, and tomorrow. So something 3 years from now is tomorrow. 3 years ago was yesterday. My wife is constantly having to correct me when I say someone left my job 5 months ago, and she'll say, no, that was 3 years ago, because I can't perceive what the time is. So what I've learned how to do is I use benchmarks. When did I have long hair? When did I go through the heavy metal spandex phase? When did I do my last concert? When did I take pianos? In the future, okay, when do I expect these semester finals to happen? Well, they're going to happen on XYZ date. The next Spider-Verse movie makes me very upset because they've moved it several times. So I'll have these benchmarks that I use to try to place things in order since I can't do it by date. How this affects me again with classroom is the same scenario. The teacher's talking. I'm supposed to hear the teacher talking to me. But instead, the teacher's talking and I hear the talking, but I also hear the span fanning, any motor or air conditioner running, anybody cutting grass. I smell the grass that they're cutting, anyone wearing a perfume, anyone kicking my chair. If you kick my chair, I really get upset. I hate things moving or being agitated. Sorry, that was my phone telling me somebody else's phone is running out of battery. The moving air can be annoying. I don't like fans blowing on me. Oh, and I can't handle seams in my clothes at all. I feel every seam in my clothes. And all these signals hit me at the same level because none of them are being gated. As far as learning, I talked about the Mario and the fact that everything's going into this amalgamation of knowledge and information and everything in my brain. So I got to deal with that on the way to any goal. So things like you didn't do it right or good enough is very disheartening to me because I try my best in almost everything. And to feel that I failed is very crushing to me. So grades are I don't like them. To the point where I start ignoring them. Instead, I work by here's the goal that we want, here's the things that we have to reach it, and go experiment. And that's what works best in my world, my Mario world. I want a goal. I want to feel that I've obtained the goal or was an essential part of the goal. And I have some stories where I worked in group projects, thought I was being a helpful part, and then they discarded all the things that I designed that I heard them say. But that's again the way I was putting it together in my head. So, in short, best way for me to learn. Show me, teach me how the symbols work, and then let me break it. Mistakes are the learning process. I mean, I want to, if you keep on saying, well, you failed, you failed, you failed, okay, then I become disheartened. But you say, no, that was a mistake. Let's try it this way. And if you help me use my mistakes as learning tools, then that is my best learning process. Now, I do tell people that it is important to learn how to understand the rules. In my dissertation process, which died along the way because I had a teacher, one of my chair people was desperate and religiously MLA, and they wanted everything in a certain fashion. So it's important for a student, regardless of where on the spectrum, to understand how to use simple rules at least. Um, if they need to have more rules than they are typically capable of handling, then you just have a friend do it or AI or whatever you're using at the moment. But it's good to understand how the rules work. But to reemphasize and capsulate all this stuff, let us master what makes us unique. David, I like to use David in the Bible because he was a shepherd. He liked throwing rocks. That was the tool he liked to use. He was too small to use modern warfare. And one of the side notes when you do research is that a good sling thrower can fling the rock up to 150 miles per hour. And so while others fought with sword and spear and were not able to defeat the giant that was in front of them, he knew how to throw a rock. So the things that made him unique gave him the capabilities to kill a giant. He could knock the fly off of the giant's head with a rock. In a more modern environment, there was a guy that I can't pronounce his name, but in his uncle's workshop, he was fascinated with how chemistry would erode inks. He liked to know how what will take certain inks off certain paper. And during World War II, part of the French resistance, he was able to take like Jewish passports and erode the permanent ink from an acid derived from ice cream. So, in other words, his weird, peculiar behavior was what saved thousands of people. My son liked to draw. When he was about 9, he still had trouble writing full sentences. He didn't really talk in full sentences till he's about 6-ish. So what I started doing was taking his art and showing him how to make books out of it. And then I started making him write the descriptions. Eventually, he wanted to write his own chapter books. And so he learned that motivated him to develop his own language skills to where now at age 17, he's written several of his own books, illustrated his own books, and published them. He knows how to do the entire thing by himself. He now does like animations and things like that because I gave him the tools. I said, here are the things you need to look for. And then he learned them himself. My other son likes computers. So part of he was homeschooled. We said, find you something computer related that you can use in a school transcript or an employment transcript. And so he found this thing on a website where he gets a bunch of IBM certificates. And so he mastered those. And one of the nice things about those were they allowed him to completely flunk a test and then retake it. And he took some of these up to 4 to 5 times, which not only encouraged him to try over and over and over, but it also helped him learn perseverance and work by understanding the mistakes that he made each time. A real life example I like to use is AIDS. AIDS was discovered in about 1985, and they spent about 3 decades trying to develop the enzymes, a model of the enzymes, and they were not successful for 3 decades. Someone decided to take a science game and put the question out there, and within 3 weeks, this community, which is loaded with people like me, developed a working model. So while the scientists had struggles, these people, with people like me, were able to do it in 3 weeks. Personal illustration, very commonly at work, they'll be talking about something that they've been working on 6 months or counting. And I'll overhear the conversation and develop a prototype in 2 hours because I see all of the information on this big matrix, and I can plug things and do plug and play all over in my brain all day long. How this is affect, I like to throw this in here because sometimes we get people talking about religious topics. And so again, you can take this with a grain of salt with however you want to see it. But in my youth, I got fascinated with the religions, so I read them all. A lot of ancient religions and Eastern religions, finding all the truths and the ideas. And I would do a lot of synergies with them where I would like mold them into things. But eventually I got to the point where people were trying to throw very specific dogma at me. And what I found was a verse in 1 John 3:23, and it had 2 simple points. And it said to believe in his son and to love one another as he commanded us. And it said, this is the will. So it was very nice for me able to take this and say, okay, I have 2 points, and that Jesus took care of the thing with God, so I don't have to worry about that. It's been done. And then my job is to love one another. And so being able to have that very simple construct was very useful for me. And again, I have read all the doctrines, all the dogma. I mean, there's very little you can throw at me that I have not studied. And so this made the most sense to me. To wrap it up, our goal should be constructive discipline for ourselves, for our loved ones, no free pass to do whatever. We don't want to destroy the spirit and the things that make us grow unique. So being strange and eccentric is fine. Being out of the box is fine, but being destructive or abusive is not. We can be outside of the box, but it's not our job to take the matches and set the box on fire. We all have to come to grips with who we are and how we respond. And so each individual can understand their own unique design. And so I like to throw this out. I don't ask for anything, but some people like to feel like they have paid the worker for his wages. And so here's my Venmo and my PayPal. You can do with it whatever you want. If you give it to me, I use a lot of my money for charity. So you can know that it's going for goodwill and not bad habits. So, but again, thank you very much for my TED Talk, and y'all have a great day.